CEO of Direct Outbound. We are a warehousing company and we do quite a bit of this. And what I wanted to give a talk on was really, I've seen a lot more of a trend of people wanting to import products from overseas, ship them from the US or things like that, or even just ship them from overseas. So I wanted to kind of give a primer and a little bit of guidance on some best practices, some information for people who are newer on that, especially with the general e-commerce and physical product landscape picking up. So a lot of experienced marketers are launching products, stores, they're doing their product funnels, they're doing general e-commerce such as like a Shopify or a WooCommerce or a Magento, etc. Because they want more control, they want better margins, but at the same time it gets a bit of a headache and it adds a lot more than just marketing the product yourself. So I kind of wanted to simplify things and break it down a little bit. I wanted to start with bringing things into the US since the predominance of people that we talk to are working with U.S. consumers, and so bringing the products into them, dealing with customs, tariffs, duties, etc. There's multiple methods for bringing your products into the United States, including express for smaller shipments, such as like a DHL, air cargo, sea freight, as well as road and rail. Express is such as like DHL, FedEx, UPS. It's very expensive, but very fast. So that typically is what's called in Incoterms DDP. The duties are paid, everything's paid up front, pre-cleared at customs, etc. It's door-to-door shipment from the carrier. It's nice because you really don't have to deal with a whole lot, but it's not really meant for larger shipments of product coming in. It's more meant for if you have a few cartons of a smaller product that you really need quickly. Air cargo, there's a couple of options on that. A lot of your passenger airlines run their own cargo. So for instance, whenever you've been on an international flight or even many domestic, you'll see like Delta Cargo, Lufthansa Cargo, etc. So they sell off excess space in the cargo hold of the plane. And that's also why passengers have to pay $25 for bags now, because it's more lucrative for them to be putting cargo in from private companies rather than suitcases for the typical passenger. Cargo only planes, there are several that do that as well. That's no passenger whatsoever, of course. Everything is strictly cargo. There's hazardous considerations by any air that's express or cargo. And typically, when most manufacturers internationally, you'll be working with on FOB terms, which is freight on board. It is not pre-cleared at customs and the duties are not paid. So that means that the responsibility of clearing customs, and once it lands in the United States, it's no longer the manufacturer's responsibility. It's completely on you. So you have to get everything cleared, you have to get everything paid before it'll ever arrive at your facility. Sea freight is the slowest. Less than container load, which is LCL, full container load, FCL, and TEU are some common terms there. So TEU means 20-foot equivalent unit. So the typical 20-foot container is how pricing is done. It's typically you're looking at about 30 days in transit, depending on where you are. If it has to go through the Panama Canal, for instance, it takes a bit longer, but at the same time, it can be a lot cheaper than air cargo. Port locations either on the ocean, inland ports, or dry ports. Also FOB typically are the negotiated terms. So that means it's, again, your responsibility to clear customs, your responsibility to pay for any sort of duties, taxes, etc. Sea freight, consider where your customers are. It's easiest to see in a map of the United States at night. So you can see that there's kind of this dead space in the West Coast, but then the East Coast is pretty heavily concentrated. So if you have a lot of West Coast customers, it does make sense to go West Coast. If you have a lot of East Coast customers, then stick it with the East Coast. If you're splitting your inventory, it can make sense to split your shipment up. Look at where you're shipping to. We've had people run into things like labor strikes at specific ports. So it's even something that you have to consider where is it a regular occurrence where the port you are going to ship to has labor strikes. The Panama Canal does increase the cost of shipping to the East Coast a bit as well. It adds some time. It also means that you have to go on a special type of ship typically for going through the Panama Canal. Road and rail, imports from Canada and Mexico commonly can use both of these. There's a few carriers that'll go rail or intermodal. rail for part, truck for part. So it'll go over the long distance or on a train. Your container will be on one of those flatbed rail cars and then picked up by a truck. It's actually one of the more fuel efficient and cost efficient ways of doing things if it's within the continent. You could do LTL, less than truckload, FTL, and drayage is a short-term type of trucking, typically from the port to your facility. You do get the advantage of NAFTA currently. NAFTA allows for any products that are manufactured within the United States, Canada, or anywhere in the free trade zone specifically to be exempt from tariffs, duties, etc., as long as you can verify with the certificate of origin that the product was predominantly made in any of these countries. Clearing customs is one of the more challenging things that people seem to deal with. Customs broker is an independent expert licensed with the United States Department of Homeland Security. It is a registered position. If someone says they're a custom broker, you are totally within your rights to see their paperwork, their registration with Homeland Security. They can assist with every step of the process, essentially. The duties are based on the country of origin and the harmonized system code, the HS code. So everything is broken down in the HS codes from, all right, it's a textile. Okay, well, it's a cotton-based textile. Okay, well, it's a cotton-based blanket textile. So everything is broken down very specifically when it comes down to the HS codes. So that way they can properly apply tariffs, duties, etc. Inspection for contraband when you hit customs will happen. Typically it's x-rayed, but there are random inspections based on just either your package looks suspicious or completely randomized. Certain shipping materials may be improperly loaded onto your container, for instance. If it's a soft wood and it hasn't been sprayed with insecticide, then it has to be quarantined. There are other reasons for quarantines as well. Maybe there's damage to the package and it's a hazardous good, has to be quarantined temporarily. Let's see, the other regulatory agencies such as the USDA and FDA may also be a part of the clearance process. So if you're importing things like cosmetics, the FDA is involved. If you're importing food, the USDA is involved. Typically what it'll take is that the U.S. Customs and Border Patrol will be working with those agencies, and you'll receive any sort of notifications if you didn't notify them ahead of time that your shipment was coming in. There are hazardous considerations when importing. Lithium batteries are one of the larger ones that we're seeing right now specifically. Lithium batteries are extremely dangerous in large quantities if they make it on an airplane especially. So there are specific requirements for small amounts of lithium batteries all the way up to large cases full, etc. It has to be registered with the shipper. Typically they are not allowed on passenger aircraft. One of the bigger things we've seen is that if a lithium battery makes it on a passenger aircraft, it can lead to a very large fine. So there was a company recently that I had read an article about that was fined $80,000 for one lithium battery making it on a passenger airplane improperly. Everything from flammable liquids, toxic substances that are registered with the EPA under the Toxic Substance Control Act, aerosols, whether flammable or not, even hairspray. You have to provide the MSDS to the shipper. You have to provide everything to them, make sure that you have the hazardous contract with them. The UN numbers, any sort of labeling requirements, such as on the right here. There are also limited quantity exceptions, which is that one right there. So if you have a small amount of what is classified as a hazardous material, quite often it can go without problem. There are certain labeling requirements for air, but otherwise you typically won't have many issues with limited quantities, as long as they are properly labeled. As I mentioned before, the HS code information and classification system, but there are also specific things called anti-dumping duties. Now what those are essentially that the US government has determined that the company or the country that is importing this product to the United States, or exporting to the United States rather, is illegally subsidizing the manufacture of the product. As a result, the US thinks that it needs to apply a very large duty. So for instance, is steel or solar panels. Those were hit with a 240% tariff as a result of, or duty, excuse me, as a result of anti-dumping. So for instance, specifically solar panels from China have a 240% tax on them. But that also does not include things that contain a solar panel if it's not the primary purpose of the product. So there's a lot of strange things about that. There's the $800 de minimis exemption. So if your value of your shipment is worth less than $800, it will not be stopped for duties and tariffs. There are also customs processing fees. You do have to pay for the inspection. Declared values are a big deal. Under-declaring values to the United States Customs and Border Patrol is a crime. There are large fines. Your product can be seized and destroyed. Factories may attempt to declare lower values or quantities in an attempt to circumvent the laws under de minimis. The United States does investigate suspicious shipments for declared values. So if you're importing something that would typically be very expensive based on that HS code, and your factory is saying it's cheap, then there's a big risk that it'll get stuck at customs and potentially destroyed, and you'll have to pay a fine. So it's a really sticky situation. Now, once it's in the country, getting it back out to ship to customers in other countries is an entirely different thing, but it's very similar. The same methods apply for somewhat. There's express carriers, there's international with USPS, there's postal consolidators, and then you have to consider some things packaging-wise for independent or small shipments to consumers. So express carriers, again, is like DHL, FedEx, UPS. They're expensive, but they're fast. Customs and duties are prepaid most of the time, and there are ground options to Canada, typically only to Canada from the United States. Cargo air only is typically available as well for these express carriers, such as UPS has their own planes, FedEx has their own planes, DHL, etc. And every step of the way it's fully tracked. There's no other carrier handling it. They do all the handoffs, etc. inside. International USPS. There are agreements under the UPU, which is the postal union that the USPS belongs to, with all the other countries and their postal carriers. USPS carries it out of the country. The local postal carrier in the country of destination delivers it. So, for instance, Canada, it leaves out of JFK Airport. It goes into Canada. The Canada Post delivers it. It's not always fully tracked. It depends on the service level you get. There are more likelihood of errors because it's such a small volume of packages that are going out international like that, that the carrier in a rural area in another country may not be used to handling the scans, for instance. Express options are available that compete with the larger carriers like DHL. It's part of the EMS, which is under the UPU as well. It's also fully tracked, so express mail options like that. It's typically a little less expensive than your private carriers, but there are some more limitations on it. Mail consolidators. This is a private company sorts the mail, brings it to passenger airlines, and has a partnership with the USPS. The passenger airline brings it to the other country, and then the local mail carrier delivers it. So it's typically a very cheap option. Rates can be negotiated. They have a bit more room because they handle more of the work and they're privatized. It may not always be fully tracked. There are options and equivalents to e-packet, for instance. Delivery time is going to be higher than USPS Direct. It also depends on the destination completely. These options are not typically duties prepaid, though. Again, there's hazardous considerations. Only express carriers with freight will allow dangerous cargo, and special contracts are often required. There are heavy fines for dangerous cargo, making it on a passenger airplane, as I mentioned before. Lithium batteries, however, are exempt if they are in the device they are operating in. So, for instance, if you have a laptop and there's a lithium battery, a high-capacity one, it can go inside the device, and it's fine. There are VAT, GST considerations per country. The de minimis exemptions vary per country or are unified per economic zone, such as the EU. DDP and FOB shipments, a package can be held for unpaid taxes and duties until your customer has to pay their local postal service. So once it enters that country, if it's sent through such as, say, USPS International, if it's over a certain value that the de minimis exemption is in that country, then they can have it be held at their local post office until your customer comes up and has to give cash to the post office. Now, most customers don't really like doing that, so it's something to consider just in case you run into that. Some sample exemptions. Canada is only 20 Canadian dollars. Now, that's a big deal, especially because with the exchange rate right now, that comes out to the equivalent of approximately $16 or so US. So if you're shipping to anything that's over that value, it's likely to be held at the local post office in Canada. The EU, it's under 22, it's exempt from VAT and duties. 22 to 150, it's exempt from duty, but VAT is due. Anything above 150 euros, both are due. Japan, it's 10,000 yen. Brazil, 50 US dollars for postal only shipments. Express carriers are never exempt. Again, declared values are a huge problem. The customs of the country may adjust the declared value based on their research. It's something we've actually personally seen where the customs in Canada was holding packages to review what the cost was, and they even looked at the shipper's website. So they adjusted from there, and all of a sudden all of their customers have to pay tax. Criminal fines and penalties may apply for countries in treaties with the United States. Kind of ending early, but I wanted to do, if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. Just have to use the microphone. Oop. We're a fulfillment center. We do, but I'm not to talk about or things like that. So if anyone else has any specific questions, I'll also be around after the session because I know a lot of this type of stuff is something that usually isn't wanted to be asked at a microphone. So. Oop.
Yeah, so the general idea is that if you're running your own e-commerce store, if you're willing to understand and take on this, you can get bigger margins, which then can affect how much ad spend, marketing spend you have in your own budget. I mean,
Exactly.
that's the general idea. Gotcha.
Right.
Okay. Yeah,
if you're willing to take on a bit more of the headache, basically. I mean, it's something that a lot of people don't. They don't have the desire to. It's, it doesn't fit, for instance, the lifestyle business that many people are looking for in affiliate marketing or general e-commerce. But with a little bit more work, your margins can increase pretty significantly based on doing it yourself. Well, if that's all, I'm done. Thank you.